welcome to this week's AdvoChat. I have Akhila joining me. Just give a second, I think he should be on soon. Okay, there we are. Hi Akhila.
Hi Avishka.
Great to have you. So I think, as everyone knows, what's around the corner, we have the Independence Day coming up, and what's probably on everyone's mind and has been kind of going around is the expenditure, especially in a time like this where everyone's kind of struggling. Everyone knows we've defaulted. We've had a huge deficit still, and then we had this number of 200 million going around. I think they've reduced it by about 4 million today. I think that was the latest update, but still we have this number of going around. That so much is being spent on these celebrations. Anything you want to comment on straight away?
I think it would be smart of us to, out of the head, to just explain to everyone listening in today that in no way are we saying that independence in our history shouldn't be celebrated, or that there shouldn't be any celebration of any sort. It's just that we're saying that in light of given context and with the way that the state has had issues of expenditure and managing its expenses, that perhaps is spending now 196 million. Is that the most prudent step that the state should take in status quo?
Yeah, I think it's especially, with the news coming out on how some of the payments are delayed, there are medical shortages, and then also with the recent news of how Tanzania, how they went about the independence. I think it really brings to light where the kind of priorities are in the government in terms of how expenditure needs to be allocated. And I know it's talked a lot and it's in media a lot, but I just wanted to put this number into context so people realize like exactly how much of expenditure needs to be rationalized, needs to be cut down. This 200 million that we are talking about, that's only 0.04% of the entire defense and security budget. So just put that into context. Like, yes, we've got worked up into that, but there is so much more of these expenses that are being kind of spent. Like this is just like a drop in the water, and there's so much that can be done with this. And I think this is why, especially with the recent tax cuts that people keep talking about, yes, it's really, everyone's getting affected, but it's equally important that we talk about what's happening on the expenditure side. Because yes, you have your taxes, you have your income, but that's just one side of the coin. Expenditure is the same, like the very same coin, you just flip it over. So if we want to get back to basically the surplus, the IMF target of 2.3, we need to also start looking at the expenditure. Unfortunately, this is something that, even there is a bit of, noise about. It hasn't happened. It's politically unpopular. You could say the tough decisions need to be taken, but it's one that has to be done. And I hope, with more people kind of talking about and these kind of awareness on these points, they'll also see how huge some of these state expenses are that aren't necessary. And I think military is like one right in our face that we can easily cut down.
Yeah, and to add on to that, especially with the way that electricity tariffs and income taxes have gone up, I think it's only fair that people are trying to hold the state a bit more accountable with the expenses, right? And even if you look at SOE losses, if you look at CPC and the CEB circular debt that's going around, and the reason as to why that Sri Lanka has to face brownouts in certain times of the day. The problem is that the state has a systematic issue and a continued problem of where expenditure has not been, in any way curbed or in any way attempted to in a rationalizable manner, right? And I hope that this, at least this issue with Independence Day and the 196 million that's been spent, serves as a wake-up call for us as citizens of the state to be able to hold them accountable, because as time goes by, taxation and certain harder decisions only have to be taken more and more, right? And that's the precipice of the IMF deal and whatever other creditor debt that we have to take. So hopefully this does serve as a reminder for all of us, and including those in power, that expenditure has to go hand in hand with the increase of income to the state.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about state expenses, losses, basically it's the state can either get their revenue through taxes, tariffs, or kind of debt. And either way, when you look at it, we are in this issue because of that. And you mentioned CEB, the state-owned enterprises. And again, it's like I was just going through the 2020 latest numbers. From 2020 January till August, in these 8 months, you have the CPC losing a loss of 632 billion. The CEB has a loss of 108 billion. And just from April to August, you have the Sri Lanka Airlines making a loss of 113 billion. At the end of the day, these are expenses that we as citizens need to bear, which is why we keep calling for, this need to be restructured. You need to let more players in. You need to make it competitive. Because it's only through, breaking up these monopolies, make it competitive that, you can drive these prices and the costs down. Because yes, you will have some extent of raw material costs, but then you also have your operating costs. What are the wages being paid? So on and so forth. And I think that's also something that recently when the government made the decision that, they're going to stop paying the payee for these state-owned enterprises, you kind of realize that you have these probably inefficient state-run companies and with whatever bonuses, salaries that are being paid end of the day by the citizens themselves, which is why, it's really important not to just, just cherry pick these instances or, have interest, especially when, okay, we have this expense during the independence or just during the budget. It's important to, continually push to hold the governments accountable on how they are going to use this money. And that includes, cutting down these unnecessary expenses, military budget, SOEs, privatization, making sure that these are efficient and run, cost effectively. Anything else you want to, kind of just add on that end?
Well, specifically, I mean, hopefully I'm not harping on this, but I think that especially when you take into consideration things like the SOEs that we have, one thing that you need to know is that most of these enterprises are extremely bottom heavy, right? Which means that workers at the bottom end of the corporate structure or the structures that they have and they exist in large numbers. So when we talk about inefficiencies and getting rid of redundancies, unfortunately, it would mean that certain individuals will have issues of unemployment. But at the same time, since we do have social welfare in our system, even if you look at some of the payments that have been delayed by 2 weeks, and coming back to the whole issue of this independent spending, perhaps, there could have been better decisions made by the state. And I hope that the state realizes that better decisions need to be made, especially in lieu of, the political situation that is coming up within the next month or so.
Yeah, and I think when you mentioned social welfare, sometimes whenever you say, okay, we need, government expenses to cut down, everyone's quick to say, no, look, education, healthcare, welfare, etc. But, there are other areas, like you pointed out, the SOE losses, the defenses, that's what needs to be reduced. And actually, if you rationalize and you reduce these, you actually get like some kind of a surplus amount that you can put into education, welfare, and health. Yeah, you rationalize your expenses to make sure they are going, if you save 100 billion, you can make sure that maybe extra 50 billion goes into these, and then you've cut down your deficit by about 50 billion. So, that's the kind of thinking that needs to be. Unfortunately, these aren't sometimes politically popular, and for whatever reason, these just don't kind of get done. One more thing I just want to go back to, you mentioned right at the beginning, in terms of how, yes, we want to, celebrate independence. And I think I've seen this comment by a lot of people, on social media, etc., that are we really doing it the right way? There are so many other ways that this could be done, downscaling. Do we need to have such a parade? Incorporate maybe an online element to reduce expenses. Just have the national anthem, keep it simple, get the citizenry involved, get the people involved, get education, get the students involved, have maybe competitions. There's a lot of ways to be creative about this, because at the end of the day, when we talk about independence, yes, the state became independent, but it's us as individual citizens that really should be, enjoying and celebrating it. I think, Akhila, you had something to add there.
No, I was just going to bring up, you spoke of the Tanzania just before, and, this is not the first time that they have skipped on, the forms and frills of celebrating independence. I think in 2015, the then government also decided, at that point in time, perhaps discussion and discourse on perhaps reconciliation, investment into state education, and more prudent things. So once again, like there are so many other ways that independence can be celebrated, right? And yeah, hopefully that is something that our state can look into in further upcoming years.
Yeah, definitely good point. And I think the next thing, like it's titled AdvoChat, exactly how free are we? But before we move to that, I just want to mention that, you can click the question button and drop any questions that y'all have, and at the end, we'll do our best to kind of address and tackle them. And really coming back to this, concept of independence and freedom. Because when you talk about independence, you generally think about, okay, we became free from the colonizers or the British, basically.
Yeah.
But then today we need to look to see, as individuals, are we really free? And you can think about this maybe as your political freedom, maybe your freedom of movement. There are so many ways. But I think one important way to think about this, the concept of freedom, is your freedom of choice. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have a freedom of choice, you're just living this life, and you're kind of constrained, and it's really an infringement on your individuality and that ability to make, that your own rational action and decision. And this manifests in various ways. And I think one thing people miss a lot is economic freedom, because it's economic freedom that kind of essentially allows us to make these choices and, empowers us in that way. And in that context, if you look at like we have these various rankings, etc. And in the Economic Freedom Index, we essentially rank 89th. But more interestingly, in our Trade Freedom Index, we rank 138th, basically putting us, as one of the most protectionist countries out there. And it's kind of disappointing to see, because when you look back at independence, we were probably, way ahead. We were an export-oriented economy. Our GDP was actually higher. Our GDP per capita were higher than countries like Taiwan, South Korea, and Thailand. But right now, all these countries have kind of overtaken us and, got ahead. And it kind of comes down to, this idea of economic freedom, really.
Picking up of where you left off, economic freedom, the modality and the ability to go up, in society, and the way that the state has taken actions to, prevent that. I mean, even if you look at in status quo, the current regime enacted, I think, a couple of price controls, if I'm not mistaken, and the most recent being eggs, right? And anecdotally, and even if you speak to those involved in the industry, right? When such barriers to trade and the freedom to enterprise is minimized by the state, it for the most part harms, the lower end of the echelon, right? Where, right, if you follow the news, you would have seen at one point, I think the price of egg was controlled at about 46 rupees or 38 rupees or something. But you go to a supermarket and you look at the carton of eggs, and those would still be carrying on at prices of, I think, 65 rupees per egg. I mean, which just goes to show that these restrictions on freedoms are not applied unequivocally or equally, right? And even in those cases, that barrier and that restriction of freedom affects people disproportionately. And things like that raises the question that, are we truly, as a state, free in the ability to make our choices?
Yeah, I think the point to bring up in terms of freedom of enterprise is an interesting one. Because, I mean, you might tend to think of the large corporates, etc. But in reality, you need to look at, your micro and your small, medium enterprises. And most often than not, most of these regulations are going to hit them the most. Because, if you have a large scale corporation, you can, cut down your cost, you have economies of scale, all of that to bring your, fixed cost kind of down. But if you're an MSME or retail seller of, these egg products or pretty much anything, the moment you have one price controls put in, it's really restricting, especially if they're below cost. Then, like, what are you supposed to do? You essentially have to sell it at a loss. So it's very easy to see things from like one perspective. And I think that's why sometimes some of the policymakers, they fail to kind of look at what are the unintended consequences. So I think it's important that, we kind of revisit what we've taken for kind of granted to really look at it and see, okay, is this really what's best for our country? How does it restrict us? Not just you as an individual, but also others as individuals. And, like you said, like the enterprises, then you have the small, medium enterprises, the entrepreneurs. From all perspectives, you kind of want to see what are the barriers that are there. Because any barrier that essentially restricts you from making a choice essentially is something that, would restrict your freedom. And I think going back to this topic of trade, because it seems more and more evident today, like the key for growth is in trade. Like you look at the Asian tigers, you look at Vietnam, the most recent example, massive growth. And that is through trade, that's opening up their markets, connecting with these global value chains and so on and so forth. I just want to, speak of just some stats from a trade openness index, basically. That's essentially your percentage of imports and exports from GDP. At around 1977 and 1980s, it was at its peak of 77%. And then again, it peaked around the 2000, again at 77%. So we were importing and we were also exporting at a really high level. We were connected with the global, trading network. But today, it's fallen down. The latest, I think, was in 2019. It's fallen down to around 38%. And this is pre-pandemic. Obviously, there was a massive dip in the pandemic because, the entire global supply chains, everything shut down. But even if you look pre-pandemic, there's been a massive drop off. And, people talk about, look, we need to protect our imports, so let's cut our imports so then we can increase our exports. But if you look at the numbers, our imports as a percentage of our GDP since around 2004, 2005 has been continuously decreasing. And simultaneously, our exports have been decreasing. So I really don't get why people are still so, caught up with the idea of this protectionism. We need to cut our imports and then we can become export oriented, because that's just not how it works. You need these imports to remain competitive as export. And kind of these policies that have closed up our economy, is what has resulted in the reduction of these exports at the end of the day. And, lack of dollars brings us to basically where we are today. Anything you want to kind of add on to that?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at certain industries, I think the apparel industry, for example, Sri Lanka is one of the forerunners in the manufacturing of that, and perhaps as a state, you can incentivize more involvement in that, more involvement in the manufacturing of things like that. And perhaps, like essentially a problem that we have within status quo, and a lot of people are going to bring this up, is that we as a culture have accepted bribery and corruption, so to say, within the workings of the system, and things, bribery and corruption, etc., exist only as a solution to, unfair red tape and bureaucracy, that stifles the ability, the freedom to engage in business, the freedom to make certain choices or to enter certain markets. So when we're talking about freedom, it's not just the simple things as, barriers of being able to trade. Perhaps we should also look into barriers of entry into markets, where we seem to have a culture of monopolizing things, whether it be through the state or whether it even be through the private sector in oligopolies. Perhaps when we talk about open markets, those should also be things that we look into as a society.
Yeah, definitely. And, again, coming back to the whole theme of exactly how free are we and do we have freedom to choose?
Yeah.
I think like a very basic example is, for example, you go to buy a pair of shoes. And you have, let's say you have your imported pair and then you have your, you have like a local manufactured pair. Sometimes you might like maybe the design, the comfort, or whatever it is of this imported pair, and you want to buy it. But it's priced so high that you just can't. So freedom of choice shouldn't merely be like an illusion. You need to be actually free to be able to purchase that. And when you look at it, okay, why is it so expensive? You actually find there are so many tariffs on it. You have like a custom duties, you have your cess, you have a surcharge, and that's why you have this like massive markup on, imported products. And of course, today you walk into a store, you might not even see any products because most often, you have your import bans. And yes, there's the Forex crisis that are coming in, but even before that, that's another entire different story. But even if you look at the products that you do get, when you have two choices, you end up with having one product that is probably a higher quality, but it's marked up so much you can't afford to buy it, often because of these protectionist tariffs. And more often than not, this links to the idea of corruption, because these are, generally implemented due to some kind of rent seeking or, political group that has either asked the government or lobbied and, kind of created this protectionist industry.
Yeah.
But what people really need to get is, end of the day, who suffers is the consumer. It's you. So people would say, look, yes, we create so many jobs, etc., etc. Let's keep these imports out. But end of the day, even the people who work there, when they go back and they want to buy a pair of shoes, perhaps if the local pair would, the local pair would maybe last, let's say, 2 years. But an imported pair for higher quality, if it's made available at the same price, but remove these tariffs, it could be available for, the same price. And you can wear it for like 5-6 years, assuming it's, of course, generally higher quality. And at the end of the day, you yourself benefit. You as a consumer, as the individual, really benefit from this in the long run. But yeah, so I think that's one important kind of perspective or, shift of perception, how we should look at these kind of protectionist measures.
Yeah, definitely. And also when you talk about choice once more, just to add on to what you said, we speak of these indirect taxes, right? Whether it be VAT or, cess or certain customs tariffs. And seeing as a state has now directly moved away from indirect taxes and moved into direct taxes, perhaps that is another avenue that we can look at to ease the burden on the consumer, on the local person that wants to partake in the economics and buy what they want, right?
Yeah, true. I think it is complicated in that sense, but in the end of the day, like if we continue down this path, like we're just going to end up in the same place we are today.
Yeah.
I see some comments basically, how do you protect SMEs or local manufacturing? So, that's where it depends. And there's this concept of, infant industries. The problem is we don't have proper institutions in place because internationally, if you look at it, you would look at, okay, fine, you have an infant industry you want to protect. In that case, there needs to be a very set plan or a guideline, and then you need to phase these out so that they become competitive. Because if you're talking about a general local manufacturer, unless they're exposed to international competition by reducing protectionism, they're never going to become competitive. And they're going to be happy making a profit off the local customers. And end of the day, that is you. You basically pay extra for this protectionist measure or the protection they receive. Whereas if they truly become competitive within a basically whatever the short period of time that you have set up, then they should be able to compete with these foreign markets and produce at a low level to the domestic producers without having this handicap or this protectionist policies. And if they need it, that essentially means they're not being as efficient. There's some reason why they can't be cost productive. And with your resource constraints, everything, it's competition that breeds this effectiveness and also innovation. Unless we kind of open up and be forced to enter the market to compete, you don't have enough incentives to really innovate and take your game to like the next level. Anything else you just want to add on that before we perhaps move on to another aspect?
Yeah, just to touch upon the protectionism. I think it's safe to say that protectionism in status quo has led to an amount of complacency within certain markets, and that lack of competition, like you rightly said, has led to the consumers being subjected to a level of subpar commodities, where in which that there's such a large gap between imported goods and local goods that sometimes in certain cases that you're okay with paying these exorbitant prices, regardless of how scaled up they are. And also, like you said, just to touch on this slightly, if you look at certain areas where the state did try to, completely open up markets or open up certain areas that were protected, if you look at agriculture and stuff like that, not directly comparable, but if you compare the approaches that the state took, we're not saying that in any way should all imports be open and, we let the local markets just survive if they can, and if they don't, that's so be it. We're saying that certain actions have to be taken in a way that competitiveness can be encouraged in a way that it, only at the end of the day helps us, the consumer.
Yeah, I think all valid. And another, just something that generally comes up when you talk about this is basically FDI, foreign direct investment. How do you get it in? And this comes back to, creating that environment, the stability that, wants this foreign FDI to come in. And that would generally mean you show that, you're good at doing business, or there was the ease of doing business earlier. Now, of course, it's out of operation, but we used to rank really badly in that as well. And even in the economic freedom index, in terms of your ease of doing business and all the aspects related to that, it's pretty low. So you need to create this environment that actually, makes it easy for an investor to look and see, okay, this is a place where I can come in, I can be competitive. There aren't that many special interests, it's open, and it's a stable business, environment, which I think requires, trade policy to also be open looking and not inward looking. Because, I mean, you just need to go back and look at history, 70 to 77, and then post 2004. Whenever we've tried to look inwards, or, try to import substitution, it has never worked out. We end up either with food rationing or in, crisis like today. So I really hope, like, moving forward, we will see these kinds of changes, and we won't just be like a half-hearted set of reforms and then like revert back to, where we are today. Anything else you want to add to that, Akhila, before we maybe turn to the...
Yeah, I think you completely covered everything that I could have possibly said there. So yeah, I think once again, I think if there's one thing you can take away from this AdvoChat that we're having today, it's that at the end of the day, we need to hold the state accountable in the way that it takes certain actions, right? Whether it be the way it carries out its expenditure, or that the trade policy that it has, and the harms that it can have indirectly and directly on us as the consumer.
Yeah, so I think just a couple of questions that have come in. One is in terms of competition within the local market. How does that play out? So essentially, that would require, one, removing the barriers of entry, as Akhila mentioned earlier. You want to make it easy for businesses to register, especially SMEs and MSCs. Reduce the red tape, reduce the bureaucracy, because, we all know the more bureaucracies there are, the more delays there are, the more red tape it is, the more cost associated. You want to make it easy for players to enter into the market. And secondly, policy, should be neutral. It shouldn't look to favor one player for whatever reason. It should allow, new market entries to become, to play on a level playing field, essentially. That's kind of the role, essentially, that the government would ideally play. Yeah. So I think that should cover that. I see there's another one in terms of the actual Independence Day. How should we go about celebrating it? I mean, all of us, there's no reason for us to, mourn on Independence Day. We can celebrate it, put your flag up, sing the national anthem. There are all kinds of ways to do that. Akhila, how do you plan to celebrate it?
Well, you do the usual, you hoist the flag, you feel patriotic. But I think it's high time that we moved away from this notion of the pomps and frills of, having an air parade and having these long drawn out speeches and these celebrations in terms of, very materialistic things, with having the army on display. Perhaps that isn't the most patriotic thing that needs to be done in status quo. Patriotism doesn't need to be this display once a year, right? It's small incremental things that you take to do. So the way we celebrate Independence Day, I hope it's not, again, like the entire theme of this has been, it's not at the detriment to us as in ourselves, And I think anyone should have the right to celebrate it however they want.
Yeah, I think just one final point I just want to touch is, we've talked about reform a lot here, especially. But it's important that reforms are done fully and not half-heartedly.
Yeah.
And, looking back 75 years, you find that perhaps our economy was at a stronger place, in some aspects at least, in 48, for whatever reason. So we really need to get a deep look to see, okay, where did we go wrong? See what mistakes we made, because clearly what we did was not working for us to end up in this. There were certain mistakes made along the way. And it's no point making half-hearted reforms, and without following through with everything that needs to be. Reducing your expenditure, your privatization, your liberalization, removing the protectionist barriers. It's only if we truly reset our system, truly change the way, the state works, the incentive works, that we can maybe, when we celebrate 100 days, look back and say, wow, we've really come a long way. And that all ties back to, the key components that form all of our, economic freedom, which essentially empowers us to make the choices we want. So, Akhil, if there's anything else you'd like to end, or if there are any other questions before we wrap up?
No, I just end on one final note. Is that to say that, perhaps economic rights and socio-economic rights and political rights are not as estranged or disconnected as we think them to be. I hope that we understand that certain socio-political rights lead the way to certain economic rights, and vice versa as well, right? So perhaps if we can see those things to be as one, or in one continuous loop system, perhaps a lot of things can be easier for us to digest when it comes to taking decisions, whether they be harsh or easy.
Okay, thanks a lot. I hope all of you all enjoyed, and have a great Independence Day, and hopefully see you all on the next AdvoChats.